In 2001, right around the time that Mattel's commemorative Masters of the Universe line was wrapping up, a new statue of the most powerful man in the universe was revealed and offered for sale. This new collector piece presented He-Man with a brand new look. With an updated look to the classic design, this new statue was just the beginning of what was soon announced as a huge new toy line relaunch from Mattel. With redesigns of old characters by sculptors the Four Horsemen, Mattel had brought He-Man back for a new millennium. Kicking off in 2002, one of the first characters released in this new line of 6-inch action figures was the main hero himself, He-Man. In an effort to revamp this toy line, as well as to try and appeal to children of the early 2000s, Mattel and the Four Horsemen went for an edgier, more stylized figure sculpt. The same basic elements of He-Man are still there, such as the power harness, the furry boots, and that almost barbaric look. However, this time around, the body design was much slimmer, not near as big and clunky as the original He-Man action figure. And long gone was that classic page boy haircut, now replaced with shorter, more flared hair. Some refer to the redesign as being slightly anime-inspired. In fact, these days, Mattel themselves even often refer to the design of the 2002 line as a hyper-anime detail, with the idea that they tried to appeal to a new generation who were very much into programs such as Pokemon and Yu-Gi-Oh! And so on. Now, one of the biggest design changes was in He-Man's sword. The simplistic yet highly recognizable look of the classic Power Sword was updated to this much more technology-based, mechanical-looking Power Sword. Now, the reason for this drastic change actually came from an early storyline pitch from the Four Horsemen themselves. In this story, Skeletor had now acquired both halves of the original Power Sword. So in order for He-Man to continue on, Man-at-Arms built a new mechanical Power Sword, and the Sorceress infused it with the power of Grayskull so that He-Man can keep battling against the evil Skeletor to try and reclaim the original Sword of Power. Now ultimately, Mattel decided not to use this idea. So in the end, this new Power Sword just became the Power Sword. He-Man also included his other two classic weapons, his shield and his battle axe. Both of these, just like the sword, included some mechanical elements such as circuitry sculpted in. The weapons were also rather large and oversized. This ended up being another common theme throughout the 2002 toy line. The figure itself featured both a lot of similarities and a lot of improvements over the classic He-Man action figure. The figure now stood in the 6-inch scale, and he featured more articulation that fit in with more of the modern action figures of the time. Ball-jointed shoulders allowed for a wider range of movement in the arms. Initially, the Horsemen wanted to make the figure much more posable, but Mattel opted to dial it down and not give these figures the superposable treatment that was pretty common at the time. The figure retained the classic waist-twisting power punch action feature of the original 80s action figure. Also like the vintage figure, the chest harness was removable on the backside. It's worth noting that there were actually two versions of his chest harness. The early release of He-Man included a chest harness with the classic Iron Cross emblem. Eventually, a running change occurred, which gave He-Man this new insignia that more resembles an asterisk, and would become the standard on all He-Man figures throughout the rest of this line. Mattel said the reason for this was to give He-Man his own unique symbol to help identify him better than the cross would. This, however, was met with some criticism from the fans. Many pointed out that He-Man already had a unique symbol that was used starting on the original Battle Armor He-Man figure, and they asked why this wasn't used instead. Not to mention that the style of this new symbol in the MYP cartoon looked much more like the letter H than it did the asterisk on the toy. The 2002 version of He-Man was a bit of a drastic new representation of the character. A lot of the classic elements remained intact though, and it wasn't long until this became the standard look for the most powerful man in the universe. At least, that is, until later in the decade. This was far from the only version of this He-Man we would see in figure form, but we'll look at some of those other variations more down the road. Until next time.